After a decade of child-free living, I found myself pregnant, and it wasn't my husband's. My family was overjoyed, completely unaware of the truth. My father-in-law, the CEO, even publicly promised a generous reward. While I was peacefully enjoying my pregnancy, my husband's favorite mistress, also pregnant, dramatically appeared at a family dinner. She knelt, begging for recognition for her child. I couldn't help but laugh. My husband, Ethan, was infertile. My pregnancy was a result of artificial insemination, using a sperm donor chosen by him, his bodyguard, Liam. Whose child could the mistress possibly be carrying? Ethan and I, Ava, had a marriage of convenience. During our prenuptial health check, his infertility was revealed. He pleaded with me, Ava, please keep this a secret. If it gets out, it could jeopardize my succession as CEO and damage the partnership between our families. I wasn't thrilled with the marriage to begin with. Ethan's family was complicated, with acknowledged illegitimate children. However, the marriage granted me control over hundreds of high-end hotels, a significant benefit, so I agreed. His infertility was a bonus. For 10 years, we maintained a child-free facade, deflecting suspicion. But being the keeper of his secret made me his most hated confidant. Our marriage was a fragile shell. He had a string of affairs, which I ignored, focusing on my own business, the hard-won prize of this arrangement. However, his path to becoming CEO was hindered by the lack of an heir. Finally, when his father appointed his half-brother to a senior management position, Ethan panicked and asked me to conceive a child with Liam. Years of marital coldness, disapproving in-laws, and provocative mistresses had chipped away at the facade of our marriage, but the underlying business deal held. I had achieved my goal. Using my status as Ethan's wife to build my own empire. However, using a sperm donor crossed a line. Still, I agreed. Ethan offered me 5% of his shares in the family business, worth billions. Liam, a prestigious university graduate, healthy and bearing a slight resemblance to Ethan, was the ideal candidate. Though our interaction was purely clinical, carrying his child shifted my perception of him. Now, as my mother-in-law fussed over me with nourishing soups, my gaze drifted to Liam. He was strikingly handsome, even more so than Ethan. Catching my eye, he offered a quick, nervous smile. At dinner, my father-in-law announced, "Ethan, Ava, for 10 years you've insisted on this child-free lifestyle, worrying your mother and me. Our family needs an heir. Now that you've finally come to your senses, I'm delighted. Upon the child's birth, regardless of gender, I'll transfer 5% of the company shares to their name. I'm also ready to retire, and the child's full moon celebration will be the perfect occasion to announce Ethan's succession." Ethan smiled, a rare sight. He'd finally gotten what he wanted. As they discussed baby names, my gaze drifted back to Liam, his face impassive. Yet a subtle sadness lingered in his eyes. I understood. His child, yet another man, would be the father, simply due to circumstances. Suddenly, Chloe, Ethan's favorite mistress, burst in, bypassing security. She fell to her knees. "Mr. Hale, I'm also pregnant with Ethan's child. It's a boy. I know I'm not good enough, but please, give my unborn son a chance." Her youthful face held a barely concealed smugness. The Hales had a history of accepting illegitimate children. I smiled faintly. Before Ethan could react, his father declared, looking at me, "Ava, your child is also 2 months along. You'll both have C-sections. Both children will be considered twins, both yours. We'll treat them equally." I wasn't surprised. Chloe beamed, thanking him profusely, envisioning a secure future for herself and her child. Her triumph was based on the assumption that the child was truly Ethan's. Ethan was speechless. I intervened smoothly, "Father, I'll follow Ethan's arrangements." The dinner ended abruptly. Afterward, Ethan went to deal with Chloe, my mother-in-law. Perhaps empathizing, gave me a comforting hug and a set of pink diamonds worth millions. I accepted graciously, assuring her of my support for Ethan's decisions. When Ethan returned, he looked exhausted. "Ava, don't worry, I'll handle this." Father's words were just impulsive. "Only your child is ours, the true heir." Instead of anger, I offered a suggestion: don't rush to conclusions. Chloe seemed sincere. "Maybe you should get retested. Perhaps after 10 years. His eyes lit up. "Yes. If I've recovered, you'll get rid of that bastard. We'll have our own child. Chloe's child will never compare." Back in my room, I scrubbed my hands raw, trying to wash away the feeling of disgust. I realized the depth of my revulsion for him, and the blatant animosity he held for my child. But my child was my child, regardless of the father. I wouldn't allow anyone to harm them. Just then, I received a message from Liam. "I've investigated. Chloe's child isn't Ethan's. It's her classmate's. He included photos of Chloe with another man." I hadn't been wrong. I needed proof of Ethan's infertility. I suggested he get retested, needing documented evidence. The original diagnosis had been destroyed. A paternity test could expose the truth, and I needed protection against Ethan's potential accusations of infidelity. I arranged for Ethan's assistant to call him away during the test, leaving Liam to collect the results. He photographed the report and sent it to me. Before giving it to Ethan, Liam, once Ethan's most trusted confidant, was now secretly working for me. With the evidence in hand, I felt secure. Ethan returned drunk that night. The next morning, sober and back to his usual ruthless self, he announced his breakup with Chloe. I nodded. Life settled into a routine. I focused on my pregnancy, and Ethan on his upcoming role as CEO. He even stopped seeing other women. Then, at the lavish full moon celebration, Chloe reappeared, as the date of Austin, Ethan's half-brother. Just as my father-in-law was about to announce Ethan's succession, Austin stepped forward with a sealed paternity test. "Father, before you make any announcements, I have something you need to see." My heart plummeted. If it was a paternity test for Ethan and my child, I was ruined. Chloe seized the moment, loudly proclaiming her 3-year affair with Ethan and questioning his paternity given her pregnancy and the lack of pregnancies from his other mistresses. The implication was clear. She called for the paternity test to be opened. The crowd buzzed. Infertility would disqualify Ethan from inheritance. Ethan and I were both panicked. How had Chloe and Austin joined forces? We were trapped. My mother-in-law calmly stepped forward, taking our hands. "Don't worry, I'm here." My father-in-law, despite his obvious discomfort, opened the report. My hands were clammy, but my mother-in-law's grip was firm. I felt a strange sense of calm. After reading the report, my father-in-law didn't explode. Instead, he had security remove Austin and Chloe. He addressed the guests, acknowledging the family drama and revealing Austin's attempt to sabotage Ethan. He reaffirmed Ethan's succession, stripped Austin of his position, and publicly apologized to his wife, Claire, for his past infidelities. It was Claire who had orchestrated everything. She led Ethan and me to the stage. Ethan and his father embraced. Claire indicated it was my turn to speak. I understood. Taking the microphone, I apologized for the disruption, explained our initial decision to remain child-free due to our loveless marriage and Ethan's vasectomy, and described our later change of heart, his reversal surgery, and the subsequent conception of our child. I painted Chloe's claims as malicious fabrications driven by greed. Ethan followed, thanking his father, promising to uphold the family legacy, and vowing to be a devoted husband and father. Backstage, finally alone, I felt the tension drain away. Claire entered. For the first time in 11 years, I truly saw her. She revealed that the paternity test confirmed Ethan's parentage, explaining that she had anticipated Austin's move and arranged for the results to be falsified through the family-owned testing facility. Overwhelmed with gratitude, I confessed the truth about Ethan's infertility and our arrangement with Liam. Claire reassured us of her support, promising to protect us. I broke down, weeping in her arms. The weight of my arranged marriage, my unfaithful husband, and the humiliating circumstances of my pregnancy finally overwhelmed me. Claire comforted me, assuring me that my child would always be considered Ethan's, her beloved grandchild. Then, her words sent a chill down my spine. As for the child's biological father, Liam, isn't it? The three of you have been careless. I hope you'll handle this discreetly. Austin was exiled, sent abroad ostensibly for further studies. His mother, the so-called Mrs. Rosewood, faded from the picture. Claire remained unfazed, her life continuing with the added joy of her grandchild. Ethan, now CEO, traveled constantly. The fragile peace was shattered by Mrs. Rosewood's sudden illness. Ethan was in a meeting with his father when the news arrived. Claire, watching me play with my son, remarked calmly, "Don't worry, she's resilient." These dramatic pronouncements are an old tactic. Your father is remarkably susceptible. I was stunned by her composure. Ethan, too, seemed unaffected. I felt a pang of sympathy. His childhood must have been shadowed by his father's affairs. Yet, he was following the same pattern. I decided self-pity was more appropriate. I was a veritable innocent in this viper's nest. Ethan's father stayed at the hospital for 3 days. Austin returned. Mrs. Rosewood's influence was impressive. Their ambition, however, went further. Mr. Hale's lawyer summoned us to the hospital for a new will. He hinted that things wouldn't be straightforward. When we arrived, we waited for Claire. We felt outmatched, intimidated by Mrs. Rosewood's apparent cunning. Upon Claire's arrival, we entered the room together. Austin immediately fell to his knees, tearfully confessing his deception, blaming Chloe, and expressing remorse. Mrs. Rosewood, pale and frail, echoed his apologies. Mr. Hale interrupted, fussing over her. The lines were clearly drawn. Unmoved by their performance, Claire summoned the doctor, calmly questioning the severity of Mrs. Rosewood's condition. The doctor explained the diagnosis: acute myocardial infarction, with a less than 5% mortality rate. Mrs. Rosewood paled further, instantly shifting to a mask of tearful vulnerability. Mr. Hale looked embarrassed. Claire then produced a stack of medical records. One by one, she presented them to Mr. Hale: her near-fatal hemorrhage during Ethan's birth, her postpartum depression, her epilepsy, each incident coinciding with his infidelity and neglect. She detailed her struggles, Ethan's childhood lacking a father, and her own near-death experiences, all while he indulged his mistress. She reminded him of her family's financial contributions to his business, his dependence on her, and her family's support. She recounted Ethan's achievements, driven by a desperate need for his father's attention. Her controlled, heartfelt accusations resonated deeply, contrasting sharply with Mrs. Rosewood's theatrics. Claire had won. She had protected us. Mr. Hale revised his will, leaving half to Claire and dividing the rest between Ethan and Austin. Claire immediately drafted her own will, leaving her shares equally to Ethan, me, and our child. Outside the hospital, I was still shaken. Claire comforted me, wiping away my tears. "It's all in the past now." She then explained the implications of the new wills: as long as Ethan and I remained married, our combined shares, along with our child's, would give us controlling interest in the company. As for Austin, maintain appearances. No need to be ruthless. It wouldn't look good. Ethan and I, bound by shared secrets and intertwined interests, became closer, even achieving a semblance of civility. Mr. Hale suffered a stroke and became a permanent hospital resident. Claire visited him regularly, her demeanor serene and attentive. They appeared like a devoted couple, growing old together. During his final illness, as he lay dying, Claire dismissed the medical staff. Alone with us, she addressed him, "We were married for over 30 years. There's something I need to tell you." Mr. Hale looked at her blankly. "Your illegitimate son, he's right. You're not biologically related to your grandson. Because Ethan isn't your son." Mr. Hale's eyes widened. He struggled to sit up. Claire continued, "Your lawyer, Charles, the man who knows your deepest secrets, the man you joked about preferring men, he didn't prefer men. He loved me. He's Ethan's father. This is my ultimate revenge." Ethan spoke calmly, "Father, rest easy. I'll always be Ethan Hale, the CEO of Hale Industries. That will never change." He'd known all along. Mr. Hale, betrayed twice over, died in a fit of rage. The doctor recorded the time of death. I was trembling, terrified. This mother and son were ruthless. I couldn't afford to cross them. With Mr. Hale gone, Ethan held absolute power. He quickly resumed his affairs. A few bold mistresses even tried to provoke me. I remained unfazed. I'm luckier than Claire. At least, he can't produce any illegitimate children. Claire smiled. He's my son, but he's still a man. Find your own happiness, Ava. But not with Liam. He's a liability now. Maintain the facade of a happy marriage. Love a few more men. You'll understand. Men are predictable, driven by desire and ambition. They always want more. No one blames them, it's their prerogative. So we women must be smarter, more discreet. I heeded her advice. Ethan and I continued our charade. Until Liam, driving drunk, crashed his car, killing himself and Austin. Why was Liam driving Austin? My assistant's report revealed that after a board meeting, Ethan and Austin had spent hours together in Ethan's office, drinking. Ethan had instructed Liam to drive Austin home. It was a setup. Austin, unmarried and childless, left his shares to Ethan. Liam had been a pawn. Despite everything, I visited Liam in the ICU. He was on life support. An orphan, alone in the world, exploited and ultimately sacrificed. His only connection to life, his son, he could never claim. I was complicit in his tragedy. I held his hand, whispering his name. A tear rolled down his cheek. He died shortly after. Only then did I admit my love for him. We'd never been intimate, but our child was an unbreakable bond. My life, coated in a gilded cage, had distorted my values. Family meant vying for inheritance, marriage a transaction. Only Liam, a twist of fate, had offered genuine love. I received a package, Liam's phone, sent before the accident. I unlocked it with the date of our first meeting. The photo album was filled with pictures of me and our child, a silent testament to his love. Then, I found a voice recording, made before the board meeting. My heart pounded as I pressed play. Ethan's voice filled the room. "Liam, you've been with me for over a decade. You know everything about me. Do you know who I hate most in this world?" Liam remained silent. Ethan continued, "It used to be Austin, now it's you. Maybe next it will be Ava. She's my wife, my partner in all this, but this feeling is uncontrollable. Unless, if you get rid of Austin. Ideally, both of you. Then I won't have a reason to hate Ava." Liam hadn't been coerced because of our child. It was because of me. I confronted Ethan, presenting him with the paternity test results and the recording. "Ethan, how did we end up here? There was never love between us, but there should have been respect. Your infertility wasn't my fault. You made the decision about Liam. You should hate yourself. You orchestrated a murder. Turn yourself in." Ethan sneered, "Liam gave you those, didn't he? You fell in love with him. But Ava, you're my wife. You shouldn't have loved him. Your love for him gives me a reason to hate you both. But you started all this. I cried. If you don't confess, I'll expose you. He grabbed my throat. For a dead man? Against me, your husband? Have you thought this through? Your child will lose everything. I choked out, even without all this, I'm still me. I'll still love my child. You've lost your humanity, Ethan. He tightened his grip. Humanity? You married me for money. You agreed to the donor for money. Don't lecture me about humanity. Money can buy anything. Tears streamed down my face. I looked at the man before me. Once, I'd hoped for a flicker of affection. He'd crushed that hope. He had created the monster I had become. Sirens wailed. I'd called the police before coming. Ethan stared at me, finally realizing I was serious. He was arrested. He hired expensive lawyers, pleading temporary insanity. Brought on by stress and Austin's past transgressions. He was convicted. He never revealed the truth about our child's parentage, clinging to that last shred of dignity. While he was imprisoned, I, as his wife, managed his shares, gradually consolidating my control over Hale Industries. No one would ever harm me or my child again.